Okay, I think we're going to get started. Um, uh, Good evening, everyone. I think for some of our panelists, it might even be morning, but my name is Shui Wang, and on behalf of the Williams Asian and Native American Alumni Network, I want to welcome you to our first career panel. It's on the legal industry. We're joined by some very impressive alums, both from private practice and from government service, and including journalism as well. So we're in for an interesting conversation. We'll be starting with a moderated Q&A with Vivia Chen, class of 1978, and then we'll have a chance to have the audience ask any questions of Vivia, so feel free to put those in the chat, and then we'll turn to an introduction of what I'm going to call our mid-career lawyers from all around the world and in different fields. We'll hear about their interest in law and their current job roles. Of course, if you have any questions for them as well, you should raise your hand or put that in the chat as well. And then we're going to hear from Carol Wu, who's class of 2018, who's a current second-year law student at UPenn, and she'll talk a little bit about the application process for law school, which is a distant memory for some of us, but it may be very topical for some of the current students. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Vivia Chen in. We're honored to have her here with us. She's an opinion columnist for Bloomberg and was a corporate lawyer for many years. It's great to meet you. I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about, so why don't I just jump in with things. So first question, how did you get interested in law? Were there any other lawyers in your family? How did you decide to go to law school? And did you go straight to law school, or did you have a different route?
I didn't go straight, and I have the worst reason for going to law school, which is that I was an English major at Williams, and everybody said, "Oh, you're an English major, you write well, you're pretty verbal. Go to law school. That seems like a logical thing." And I really had no business going to law school, to be honest with you, because it wasn't my passion at all. It was kind of by default. But I think if people are honest, there are a lot of people who go to law school by default, frankly. So law school was interesting for me because even though it was by default, I found it to be a really intellectually interesting place. I went to NYU Law School, which is in a very urban environment, very different, obviously, from Williams. And for me, it was a real breath of fresh air. I realized I was a city person down deep. And, the country life in Williamstown was really, probably I was wrongly cast for that. So I was at NYU and I thought it was quite stimulating. And I thought the students were very impressive. They were very vocal. And they were very different from the students I knew at Williams because they were constantly challenging the professors all the time. I mean, they were kind of, I guess in some ways, a little bit antagonistic, and maybe that's part of the New York persona, but I found that to be interesting. And though I didn't end up practicing law longer than 5 years, I found it an enriching experience and something that really helped me in doing what I'm doing today, which is being a journalist, because, I feel like I'm much more logical, much more focused on what the issues are. And I think I'm better at doing what I'm doing because of it.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to your current work in journalism, but how were those 5 years? What did you do, and was it what you expected? And then, yeah.
I'm not sure what I expected, first of all. You asked me whether I had any relatives in my family who are lawyers, and the answer is absolutely not. My father was, kind of a stereotypical Asian American. He was a mathematician for Texaco in Texas. My mother didn't work, and so I had absolutely no idea what the legal world was about. And my parents didn't particularly encourage me either because that was so out of their realm. they couldn't really fathom it. So when I told them I was going to law school, in some ways they were impressed, but in other ways they really didn't understand what I was getting myself into. And when I started practice, I would say, it's a really different world, right? It's a corporate world. If you've been a student your whole life, you really don't know how to play the game. And I think a lot of being a lawyer, frankly, is playing the game. It's not just being smart. It's not just, doing what you're supposed to do or what you're told to do, but it's really understanding how to navigate the corporate environment. And to be honest with you, I don't think I was particularly good at that. One reason I'm not so good in that kind of place is that I tend to be pretty blunt in what I have to say. I'm probably too honest for my own good, which is why I'm probably more suited to do what I'm doing now than being part of the corporate culture.
Well, so then how did you land in journalism?
As I said, my superpower is writing. So I think you eventually gravitate towards things that you do truly well and something that interests you. So I got into journalism. I always tell people ask me, how did you get a job that's so interesting? I said, it's easy, just take a vow of poverty. Basically, especially these days, when you compare what journalists make to what lawyers make, especially lawyers who are practicing in big law, it's a very different world. But I think you got to do what you're naturally good at. And for me, I was much better at critiquing the profession than actually practicing it.
And so you've been an observer of the industry for a few decades now. What changes have you seen? And
I've seen a lot of change. Some good, some not so good. I think the positive side is that there's definitely more openness to women, for starters, and diverse people. When I started practicing, which was in the dark ages in the mid 80s, women really try to emulate men in so many respects. First of all, everybody, women who were pregnant would hide their pregnancies until they couldn't hide it any longer. They would dress in ways that kind of mimic men, the suit and the cotton blouse, and they even wore these little silly silk bow ties that kind of like a female version of a necktie. You certainly don't see that anymore. I think those days are gone. I think it's true that you can be more genuine than people have been in the past. I think there's been more of a feminization of the profession, not only in not hiding who you are, but also in accepting a wider range of professional style. And by that, I mean, you don't have to be like a hard-charging, stereotypical male litigator. You can actually bring a different side of things to the table. You can be different. You can be who you are, much more so. Of course, there are limits to that. When people talk about bring your authentic self to the table, I always say, yes, but not completely, please. So those are the positives. The more negative side of the profession is that it's really more brutal than ever, which is hard to believe because law has been, at least practicing the way it's practiced in big law, has always been an extremely demanding, pressured type of job. And that has not changed. If anything, it's gotten worse in the sense that more billable hours are expected of lawyers than ever before. I think when I was practicing, if you bill 1,800 hours, that was considered very respectable. Now you hear young lawyers who are billing 2,600 hours a year or even more. And I think the road to partnership, if that's your goal, has gotten so much harder. It's gotten just about impossible. And so much more emphasis is placed on being a business developer. You can't just, rise through the ranks, get great reviews, do a great job and expect to make partner. That's just not the way it works anymore. You have to go out there, you have to have clients, and you have to be aware of that, I would say, pretty much from day one.
Yeah, so as students so assuming they're still interested in this path, I don't know if that's going to be the case on this panel, but anyways, um, if they're looking at different firms, because presumably there is still differentiation between, you know, based on the size of the firm or the different cultures of firms. Um, what sort of generalizations can you make about, maybe we'll start with size of firms and the work?
Well, let me just say that I cover the world of big law. So I tend to, my focus tends to be on, you know, the sort of the what's called the 200 largest firms in the nation, which is called the AmLaw 200. So that's really what I know the best. Now, that being said, I think there are differences in certainly in style of firms, and there are differences not so much, not necessarily based on size, but I would say that every firm has distinct cultures. And I think some firms are known to be more rigid than other firms. And I guess the way, if I'm looking at firms today, starting out, I guess as a woman and as a woman of color, I would certainly look at the statistics to see, you know, which firms seem to have better statistics as far as promoting women, just having large numbers of women and diverse people, because I think it really does count to see other people who look like you. I didn't have that. Let me put it this way. When I was going up the ranks, you know, I go into a conference room and I would always be not only the only woman, but the only person of color. So I know how that feels like. But I think these days, you know, you can find firms with better stats, some better than others. But beyond that, you know, there's also differences in practice areas. I mean, you should go into the practice area that you like the best for whatever reason. So I would never dissuade anybody from going into, you know, I guess what's considered a more macho field like mergers and acquisitions. If that's what you want, go for it. But certain practice areas are known to have more women and minorities than others, such as labor and employment law. Believe it or not, actually litigation, you're beginning to see more women rise through the ranks there. I think for whatever reason, certain sectors of corporate laws, such as mergers and acquisitions, still tend to be more male dominated.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting aspect of law. You know, for doctors, they have residencies and they send med students into all these different practices so they can get a sense of what different practices are like. It's hard for lawyers and law students to get a sense of what the options are. I'll be curious when the others speak to hear how people ended up in the areas that they did, because so many law firms even expect their summer associates to almost specialize as soon as possible.
That's unfortunately very true. You know, it used to be that you can rotate through various departments at a law firm, and it seems like that's a luxury that's no longer given to most junior associates at this point. As I said, you know, firms are just so much more bottom line oriented. You know, I guess if I were a law student, I would try to sort of get a sense of what kind of practice might excite you. You know, I would take a fairly broad range of classes, and you know, just see. But even then, I have to say that, you know, practice is different from law school. And as with any job, it really comes down to the people you work with, frankly. If you have a good mentor relationship with whoever you're working for, that makes an enormous amount of difference. And, you know, maybe it'll bring out the, you know, the inner tax lawyer in you that you didn't knew existed.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned mentors. It's an issue that comes up at my workplace, and I'm sure at many others. How would you recommend seeking out a mentor? Is it something that should happen organically? How do you nurture that relationship? Any thoughts on that?
You know, that's a very broad question, because, you know, I would say don't think that you're going to have one mentor in your life. I think you can have different mentors at different stages for different reasons. The best advice I can give is to just be very open, be open, listen to people, and just be out there. And you can't start getting a mentor early enough. I think even if you're in college or in law school, I would seek out people that you admire, or you feel you have some kind of core sympathy with, and just talk to them, because relationships, it's all comes down to relationships, and it's relationships that will pay dividends in the long run. It's very hard to go up to somebody and say, will you please be my mentor?
Yeah. Well, I think you venture to say, including the people you hear from today. This is the Williams Alumni Network, and
Yes.
if you hear from someone who's in a field that you might be interested in, you should definitely feel free to reach out and talk to the person more offline.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think alums are a great resource, and I think Williams being a much smaller college, I think alums are much more accessible than other places.
Yeah. So I'm curious about how the pandemic has changed big law firms and the way they do things, and whether how that affects younger associates.
Well, it's changed dramatically in the culture of law, right? Because all of a sudden, no one is going to the office. And even now, firms that supposedly have a 3-day rule or 2-day rule, people really aren't abiding by it. I think the days of being in the office 5 days a week are certainly gone. I think even 4 days are gone, maybe 3 days. So I think it's changed in the sense that we realize that you have flexibility, which is something that women have been fighting for a long, long time, as you know. For a long time, women have been clamoring for more flexibility to sort of manage the work-life balance juggle. And now it's because of the pandemic, and men have taken advantage of it too. It's all of a sudden like, oh yeah, of course, anybody, yeah, it makes sense. We can be productive and work remotely. I think working remotely is fantastic. However, I really think that people have to realize, you have to show up sometime. If you want to make that contact with partners at a law firm, being in person makes a huge difference. And if you want to develop clients, which I cannot emphasize enough is the name of the game, if you want to make it in a law firm, you have to be there. You have to, the one-on-one contact is not to be underestimated. And it's not a matter of efficiency. It's not a matter of how much work you can get accomplished. It's really just the sort of the soft skills and the little nuances that's going to make a difference in the long run.
Yeah, it's hard to learn how to. I think training is hard for new associates too in a hybrid world.
Right, yeah. I think there's a lot of resistance, though. Everything I'm hearing, the Gen Z is saying, hell no, I'm not going back.
That'll be an interesting topic when we get to the other panelists to talk about sort of generational differences in
exactly
how we were trained when we started, and we did document review, 20 people in a room comparing what we were.
You should go to the printer and stay all night, right?
Right. Well, that seems to
I'm really
be
dating myself.
A relic. So you mentioned earlier about the numbers of Asian Americans in law have been going up. I presume the numbers at law schools are also going up, but there seems to, people talk about a bamboo ceiling, whether it's the numbers of Asian Americans who make partner, or or even general counsels at firms, or sort of reach the top echelons of their organization. What do you think? What do you think can be done to help improve some of those numbers?
Well, I think there are two things. well, let me just backtrack a little bit and talk about how Asians have progressed in the last decade or so. First of all, you're seeing an amazing number of Asian Americans in big law as associates. You know, they're really kind of dominating the ranks. I think it's something like, you know, more than 12%, 12 to 14% of big law are composed of Asian Americans at this point. But when you look at how many of them are making partner or staying on, that's a very different picture. At that point, it drops to 4% who make partner, and Asian Americans have one of the largest attrition rates of all groups. So there's something going on there, which is telling them they're not to stay for whatever reason. What will make the difference? I think what will make the difference is, again, sheer numbers. I think at some point, those numbers are going to have to improve on the upper ranks as well. And you do see more Asian Americans in the corporations, in the GC suites. So that's going to make a difference. The question is how long that will take. So that's one side. The other side is that I think Asian Americans or Asians have to just sort of take responsibility for themselves too, in the sense that they have to be more assertive. You know, I hear over and over again that from other Asian American partners that Asian associates are not as vocal as their white counterparts or other ethnic counterparts. They don't speak up. They tend to be too deferential. You know, in some ways, they reinforce the stereotype that Asian Americans are good worker bees, but not quite leadership material. So I would say speak up, you know, be demanding. And I know that, at least I hear that it cuts against, you know, one's upbringing, yeah, the idea that you can never be polite enough. But I can tell you, it just does not work in the world of law. You have to be your own advocate.
Yeah, that's good advice. Well, okay. Well, before we turn to our other panelists, if someone came up to you and asked you if they should go to law school, what would you suggest? What would your advice be?
I don't do what I do, which is, you know, go by default because I'm an English major and I don't know what else to do next. I think you have to really, I mean, law school is a huge investment at this point. You know, back in the day when I went, it's like, I look at what I paid and it's like bargain basement rates. Now people are coming out, you know, $150,000 in debt. That's serious money. So I would say, be sure to know that this is what you want to do. I would talk to a lot of people, talk to a lot of lawyers, and be excited about it. If you're not genuinely excited about the practice of law, whether it's working on a law firm, being a prosecutor, working in the government, don't go.
Actually, I have one last question.
Sure.
Do you have thoughts on whether people should take time off between undergrad and law school?
Oh, I think taking time off is always great. Take as much time off as you
Yeah,
can.
full disclosure, I took 4 years off. I tend to agree.
No, I think the people I knew who did the best in law school were really actually people who had not only taken time off, but many times were people with, believe it or not, women with small children, because all of a sudden they were very focused on what they had to do. They were very motivated. So, you know, law is it's not an easy profession. I don't think you can really sugarcoat it. It's not glamorous, really. The offices look good. The salaries are quite good if you go into a big law firm, but it's a tough profession. Just make sure that this is really what you want.
Very helpful. Okay, I think this is now a good time to turn to our mid-careers, as I'm calling them. I was asking each of them to speak for a few minutes about their decision to go into law and about their current career roles. We're going to start with Jean Kim and then progress, starting with the class 95 and then moving to the class 96. And of course, if anyone has any questions for Vivia, put them in the chat, including from the panelists. If she touched on anything that you have questions about, she's going to be with us for a little bit longer, and would love to get a discussion going as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jean Kim, and I'm going first, so that, basically says I'm the oldest one, so that's kind of fun. Anyway, yeah, so I graduated Williams in 1995. I took about a year off. I worked as a paralegal for a year in New York City and then went on to law school. I went to law school not as a default but because I was interested in the profession because it seemed like a learned profession. I think I saw a lot of my classmates going into business, finance, medicine, academia, and I knew academia and medicine were not for me. And of the other professions available, I did kind of latch on to law just because it did strike me as a learned profession. And I like the place it had in our society. It is one of the spheres of influence. And I thought that I had kind of a skill set that was suited to this area. So that's why I went to law school, and I went to law school out in California at UC Hastings. They gave me a pretty good deal. After my first year, I was like, in state. So that was pretty exciting. It's the largest public university system, I think, in the United States. So for all those reasons, I landed there. I actually did not enjoy law school very well, just because it was such a different kind of way of learning from Williams, at least. I didn't mind the Socratic method, but all this kind of, getting into groups and creating outlines and, studying for these exams, it just seemed very divorced from what I envisioned to be the practice of law, but I certainly muddled through. And during law school, I did a bunch of internships over the summer, which I think was a very good idea because at the time I did it just to kind of understand what areas I might be interested in. And my last internship was with the FTC, which FTC office in San Francisco, and they focused on antitrust law and consumer protection law. And I certainly gravitated more towards the former. After graduation, I worked actually at the Attorney General's office for just a couple of months. It was a couple of months, a stint for only a couple of months, because they were bringing a preliminary injunction hearing, seeking an injunction against a merging hospital system. So that was actually kind of really interesting kind of in-court experience in antitrust. So I stayed behind after law school and litigated that case as a law clerk, but got kind of amazing experience. I landed in New York. My first job was at a big law firm, Skadden Arps. I chose kind of a safe kind of landing spot in terms of, launching myself out of law school. I wasn't quite clear exactly what I wanted to do. I was interested in antitrust, but just wanted options. And so landing at a big firm was a plus in that way, because as Vivia and Xiaowei mentioned, at that point in time, they let you cycle through various practices and kind of see what you were interested in. So anyway, I developed an early interest in antitrust and competition law. So I landed in that department, was there for 4 years, and then decided that I found transactional law pretty boring. It wasn't really for me. I was more interested in litigation. So I jumped and had like a phenomenally short job search because I just tapped the one Williams alum that I saw on the alumni register who practiced antitrust law. And he happened to have his own firm. And, you know, I had a lunch with him, and that was like the extent of my last job search. So I landed at Constantine Cannon, which is a boutique firm that specializes in antitrust, competition, litigation, and I've been there for over 20 years now. And yeah, so suffice it to say, I'm one of the few remaining in private practice of my kind of peer group from law school.
Well, maybe you can speak a little bit about the differences between a big law firm and a boutique firm.
Right. Understanding that, you know, Skadden is its own kind of animal, and other big law firms may be very different from Skadden, but consistent with what Vivia observed, Skadden was very, you know, bottom line oriented. I was doing transactional work there, which from an antitrust perspective means, you know, there are these big, you know, billion-dollar deals that are happening, and you push them through the regulatory agencies. You gain approvals from the DOJ or the FTC to clear a merger, basically, and that was my work. We were basically a feeder group off of the M&A group, and that was basically the bread and butter of Skadden Arps at the time. They had a big mergers and acquisitions group, and that was pretty much their kind of bread and butter. A lot of well, many clients emanated out of that practice. So look, I would say, contrary to what others have said, it was actually kind of glamorous. I would open up the Wall Street Journal every morning, and I'd be like, oh, okay, I worked on that deal. And oh yeah, I have like a little tombstone from that deal, and that was kind of fun. And oh, they flew me to Amsterdam to just look at a couple of documents that, you know, the FTC might raise an eyebrow on. And, you know, so in that sense, it was pretty glamorous for like someone in their early 20s being kind of jet around Europe to, you know, review deal documents and, you know, get the deal done. But at the end of my 4 years, I just realized, I mean, you know, it was pretty draconian. You know, you'd have these kind of weekly lunches with all the partners, and it was very much kind of, yeah, I mean, it was very paper pushy to me at the end of the day. I thought I'd be going to court and making arguments and writing, you know, kick-ass briefs and doing all that kind of stuff. And I wasn't doing any of that stuff. I was writing white papers and, you know, analyzing deals from an antitrust law perspective, but not really getting the court time that I thought I would be getting. So when I jumped to the boutique firm, it was, you know, I think people perceived me a little bit like a prima donna there, because I thought there would be an IT department, a mail room, and, you know, all this stuff. And it was kind of, I was kind of there like, where's my staff? There was no staff. I had to learn how to, you know, operate a fax machine. And it was just kind of a hot mess to start. And there was a lot of frustration, but I would say, you know, as you kind of wrap yourself around a very tight-knit community, if you land at the right kind of smaller firm in the specialty that you want to practice in, it's been great. It's been really great. I love my colleagues. And, you know, I look forward to mentoring opportunities with associates who land in our firm. It's very night and day, and there are good and bad things with both. And I don't, you know, absent a job at the AUSA or something of that nature right out of law school, I don't regret going to a big firm, you know, to start, because that's kind of like the widest kind of set of opportunities that, you know, you could be afforded out of law school. And it was good to jump into a big pond out of law school when you didn't really know what you were going to specialize in.
Sounds good. Any last minute advice for students who might be considering law school?
Yeah. The notion about finding a mentor, right? It's like, as Vivia said, you don't just go up to somebody and say, I'm really energetic, I did really well in law school, like be my mentor. I mean, that's not going to get you anywhere. The way you find your mentor is you make yourself indispensable to a partner who has influence, who has a book of business, who has been through, you know, what you hope to go through on partner track if you go into private practice, and you make yourself indispensable to that person. You know, work up their cases, you do the grunt work, you prove yourself reliable, you author articles with that person, and you know, and then you end up with a give and take type relationship where they might end up your mentor, and you know, it's a two-way street, which I think is something that people don't realize in the mentor-mentee relationship. I mean, I mentor people without getting a whole lot back, just because, you know, our firm has set up a mentor-mentee program that I think is very good. But in terms of my personal experience, I found that you find your mentors by giving something to them and making yourself useful to them, and then they will get an interest in your career and help you along.
That's great advice. Thank you. Okay, maybe we'll move to Lana.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lana Choi, class of 96. If you've read my bio, you kind of know the basics about my path through my career, but I was one of the people who went straight through to law school. You know, I graduated in June and I was on campus at law school in August. For me, it was the right choice. A lot of it had to do with I was just not interested in getting a job. I, you know, on campus interviewing, you know, they're pretty aggressive, you know, like Price Waterhouse and McKinsey and those consulting companies come, but, you know, I just was not feeling employment at the time. And I think that, you know, I loved Williams. I loved being in school. And I was like, wow, you know, just being in school for even longer, that's great, you know, kind of put off adult responsibilities for a little longer. And you know, I think Jean really articulated it well. I think there was this undercurrent of feeling that it's a learned profession. There's something respectable about that. I'm sure most of us have parents who really like the idea of us going to law school, you know, if we're going to be doing something that they can tell people about that makes sense. Yeah, I think that that's kind of carried with me. There's this whole idea of, you know, having a profession rather than, you know, some other kind of career, and not that, you know, being a lawyer is automatically more respectable than anything else, but I think just you know, my personal feelings and probably cultural issues as well, you know, I do kind of, I was just comfortable with that, with entering a profession. And I was very happy to be in school for another 3 years. So I went to Columbia in New York City. And as Vivia pointed out, you know, New York City is a crazy different environment than Williams. It was an adjustment. It's a relatively small school for law schools. I think that it was about 300 per class, so it wasn't overwhelming, but just the atmosphere was definitely different. I'm definitely more of a city girl. I engaged in no hiking, no outdoor activities whatsoever at Williams. So I was happy in New York City. It was the right place for me. You know, with law school, there's just kind of a defined track. There's required classes that you take your first year: torts, contracts, civil procedure, legal writing, very few of which actually have anything to do with practicing law, but I guess everyone goes through it. And then there's a little bit more freedom in your second and third years as to what you want to do and classes you want to take. And this is sort of a theme, I think, in my career that I just kind of feel like once you get into a headspace where you feel like you're doing things for yourself and you're pursuing things that are interesting to you and that make you happy, and that you're not trapped, and that you don't have to do anything, you know? And in law school, I definitely, you know, especially third year, I think I bailed on like a corporations class after a week to go do a play at Barnard and I managed to finagle law school credit for it, you know, because I felt like doing it. I was in my third year and it made me happy. And I don't think it negatively affected the jobs I was offered or anything. But you know, you have a limited amount of time and you want to make the most of it. And did I want to take a corporations class? No, I really didn't care. So after law school, I summered at firms, both my first and second year summers. That's definitely a nice thing to do, just because it's kind of like summer camp. Firms really make it very exciting. You know, they are throwing a lot of money at you for not doing too much work, basically to have fun, learn about the firm. They want to make you happy because they want to have you take that job later on. So they take you out to amazing lunches and beautiful events, and they're really, really nice to you. So it was a good way for me to spend my summers. I accepted an offer from a firm that I went to for my second summer. But right after law school, I clerked on the federal court in New York for a year. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the clerking process. It's something that's commonly done for, you know, a lot of people tend to do it after law school, clerk for a judge. It's probably most helpful to folks who want to do litigation of some sort. And it's kind of another way to extend that kind of academic experience for yet another year. And there are plenty of people who clerk for several years. You know, they kind of go through different courts. They'll go to district court and appeals court and Supreme Court. You know, there's definitely Williams folks who have clerked on the Supreme Court, and they've really managed to extend that extra experience a bit longer. But after my clerkship year, I worked for a large firm in New York, like an AmLaw 200 firm, pretty typical. And I had a generally positive experience there. The intention was that I needed to pay off my loans. I did not really consider making a life in big law. It was not why I went to law school. I'm not saying that there's anything bad about it, but you know, I feel like every person has to find their own path and find what works for them. But it was pretty clear to me that that's not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. My priority was to learn as much as I could, go to a firm where I really enjoyed the people, and make the money to pay my loan so I could enter a career in government service, which is what I had always planned to do. I think with government service, there's kind of two paths. There's like the prosecutor path, and there's sort of an agency counsel path. And I'm more on the agency counsel side. And I think that really, I've really always enjoyed giving advice, helping people, you know, kind of talking through people's problems and recommending a path or talking through their issues. And that's something I really enjoy. And it's kind of nice, you know, I do enjoy my job because I get to do that, you know. Maybe the problems are not like gossipy or dishy, but, you know, I really do like to, you know, talk to people about their issues and how can I help, and sort of what sort of path can you recommend for them to resolve their issues in the most efficient way possible. And that's not always going to court and making a big thing. You know, a lot of times there's just different ways to solve problems. So in essence, you know, I do see the best part of practicing law as problem solving and helping other people solve their problems. So after a big firm, I did go to a litigation boutique. Like Jane, you know, I think it's a really good move. A boutique firm, it was a spinoff of a much larger firm. Those were some of the greatest years I had in private practice. And I do sometimes think that if I could find or replicate that experience again, I would have stayed in private practice, just because I was given so much responsibility. The firm was just so much like a family, and mentorship was from everybody. It was an incredibly unique environment. I was very, very lucky to find it. I do feel that on the business end, that the firm actually no longer exists. They did decide to merge with a larger firm about 5 years ago. And that business model tends to be disappearing, especially in certain parts of the country. But it's always something to keep an eye on. If a big firm isn't for you, maybe private practice is still for you, because there are other options. It's not just like there's only one way to do something. You could be a solo practitioner, you could go to a smaller firm. There are options out there. It's just a matter of finding them and talking to people who've been through it. But I did leave that firm because I relocated from New York to San Francisco. And I actually took about a year off to go traveling. I think I was kind of making up for the year that I did not take off between college and law school. And that's another thing, I sort of felt, a lot of people asked me, how could you take that time off? Weren't you damaging your career? I just feel like we have very nice schools on our resume. I'm still a functional reader and writer. Something will come up, and there will be something that comes up. And sometimes it may not be exactly what you think you might necessarily be interested in, but can it take you in a different direction? I ended up in San Francisco as in-house counsel to the Department of Health and Human Services. And I worked very closely as an advisor to the Indian Health Service Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services. I had no background in Indian law. I had no background in health law. I was a general litigator, and I learned it. And I learned areas of law, especially with Indian law. And I pardon the term, that's just the government calls it the Indian Health Service. But, I had no knowledge at all of the Native American population in this country or their health issues. And it was incredibly fascinating. And I think what I was struck most about working for them is that it was the first time where I was not the only woman in the room. I was not the only person of color in the room. And you'll see that more, I think, on the government front. It tends to be a more diverse environment with attorneys. Anyway, my career is kind of split up into decades. So my 20s, law school in New York City, big firm, private practice. 30s, San Francisco, federal government agency. About 7 years ago, I moved to LA because my husband had gotten a new job. So I moved to LA, did not have any prospects, and wound up finding a job with LA County Council, which is where I am now. And I do a lot of work involving law enforcement, the Board of Supervisors. Right now, my life is taken over by gun control, gun safety issues. I work sort of balancing on criminal and civil work. I'm not a criminal lawyer, but a lot of our stuff kind of edges on that way. And again, I did not have any experience in law enforcement or criminal law for that matter. It was just something different. And I think that, I think my career has kind of taken me in different directions. And I think I've always resisted specializing, mainly because I did not want to be bored, and I do get bored easily. So again, it's really a matter of I'm doing what makes me happy. A really common question that you might get asked in law interviews is, where do you see yourself in 10 years? And for me, the answer was never about a title or making a certain amount of money or anything like that. It's really, the honest answer is that I see myself doing work that I find meaningful. I see myself working with people who I enjoy, and I see myself being happy in my personal life. And that's what I want. So that's kind of the big advice I would give you all. Never feel that you have to be trapped. You'll hear a lot of stories about lawyers burning out, regretting what they do, regretting their path. Maybe I shouldn't have gone to law school. There are a lot of different things you can do with the degree and with the skills that you have. And it's just really about knowing that you're never going, don't ever back yourself into a corner, like definitely do what makes you happy. We only have a limited amount of time. So that's kind of what I would put out there.
Thank you very much. I just took a peek at the time, and we actually I think we need to pick up the pace a little bit, but we can turn to Danny and then Richard.
Sorry, I just needed to unmute there real fast. Yeah, Lana brought up a lot of points, and actually I could probably riff off of not only what she said, but also what others have said tonight. I mean, there's so many different themes, but I guess I'll start at the end, which is kind of just riffing off where Lana ended, and that is that, for all the similarities, I think that you'll hear about our careers and kind of our past. There's so many different, you'll find there's so many like nuanced differences, and part of that is kind of the joy or the advantage of being in the legal profession, and that is that even within a regimented kind of path or set of paths, you can find so many different little ways, little different pathways that you make of your own. And I think that'll be kind of a big thing, for people to take away, is that you can really make of it what you want, even within a lot of regimented paths. I needed to get out of school. Like, I loved Williams, but I couldn't go straight to school. I probably would have failed out or stopped going to class if I'd gone straight to law school after college. So I did the consulting route, and did government consulting, and did economic and financial consulting kind of at a firm in just outside DC. But one of the things I found out was that I really, I remember thinking on the one hand, I was deciding between, going to business school or going to law school, because I had lots of friends who did one or the other. And, there's a while that I toyed with both. And I realized that a lot of things I was doing, a lot of the skills that I had and my interests really fit more with law school and being in the field of law. So I went to law school, went to University of Virginia. I'm from the DC area, and I ended up staying there for most of my professional life. And it did the big law firm thing. I think a lot of us, being, kind of not to assume stereotypes or anything like that, but, being kind of the overachieving, dutiful workers or whatever, put your head down and you do your thing. I mean, I remember thinking that, yeah, I'm not sure I want to be a firm partner or whatever, but I'd like to have the option to do it. I'd like to think that I could achieve it, because I've always achieved and I've always kind of been successful or whatever. And then, for various reasons that didn't work out. But I don't regret going to a large firm. I spent about 6 years there. I think but I don't regret going there because I got the training that I did, and got the exposures to lots of different practice areas, lots of different attorneys. And then I got to see and touch on lots of different areas of law that I probably would never get to see. And I took away a couple things from there. One is that you get to experience things and touch on things that you wouldn't get to see otherwise, which is what I just said. But the other thing is that you really learn that there's a lot of similarities, even for things that you would never consider the same. Like tax law, which is kind of what I do now, and labor and employment law, and antitrust, and or healthcare. You realize that there are so many similarities, at least in the sense of you're doing legal research, you're talking and conferring with other attorneys, you're dealing with opposing counsel, you're doing writing and reading, and you see the similarities even when there's differences in the actual substance. And so you come to realize really quickly that it's less about those types of differences and more about, well, do I enjoy the people that I work with? Can I handle being in a room with them for several hours in a day? And that's, those, you realize that those things are more important than worrying about, well, I really like this area of law or something like that. And don't get me wrong, it's certainly very, very important to be passionate about what you do and what you're doing, working on. But I think you come to learn that you can find passion in a lot of different ways.
Can you talk a little bit about your current role and?
Yeah, well, so so one of the things that I ended up finding out was that the thing about being at a firm was I wanted to do litigation, and I wanted to figure out whether I could do it, whether I could be good at it, and whether I'd like it. The problem was is at a firm, you don't really, it's hard to find that out. And after about 6 years, I hadn't really figured out or gotten much closer to answering those questions. So I was able to get a job at the Justice Department where they give you your own cases, and sink or swim, you get, you write and you take ownership of, a brief or of a motion, and that's your case. You're representing the government or you're representing your client, and there you go. It's overwhelming, and it's intimidating, but it's really empowering and really kind of cool. And so I got to do that with a section in the civil division at Justice. Frankly, I'd still be doing that today if I didn't meet my wife, my now wife. And so we had we were kind of doing long distance dating and stuff. And so either she was going to move to DC or I was going to move to Ohio. And so, 9 years ago, I moved to Ohio. And then I ended up finding another job here working for the state attorney general's office, but kind of doing a lot of the same stuff as I was doing at the Justice Department, having my own cases, representing the government, a government agency, and doing litigation. I mean, I do a combination of trial work and appellate work, and get everything from settlement discussions to oral arguments to brief writing to doing cross examinations and direct examinations. I get the whole gamut of being a litigator. And again, it's more sink or swim. You get these opportunities that you really wouldn't get, as a junior attorney, unless you've got some either, a little bit of luck or you happen to be with the right mentors and things like that. And I didn't get those for whatever reasons. But I've got those opportunities now, and so I've been kind of enjoying those things. But yeah, but in terms of the I still haven't completely answered the question of do I still want to do litigation or whatever, but I certainly feel like I've been able to answer that question of do I like it, or can I do it, because it's so much of it is a matter of getting the opportunities, and it's but I had to go out of my comfort zone and say, well, the firm thing is there's some easiness to it in the sense of it's very well defined. And kind of going outside of that is a little scary. Can be a little scary, a little intimidating, but you empower yourself, you take command of it, and you take control of it to the extent you can, and then you really can learn about yourself. And so that's been really one of the most rewarding parts, is I've been able to learn about myself a lot. And the only other thing I'll say real fast is that I think it was Vivia early on was talking about wanting and needing to be yourself, and trying to find kind of that balance between kind of our stereotypes and but also kind of trying to be able to succeed in the legal profession. I think there's some you have to be genuine, and you have to be, if you're not a loud person, you can't be that screamer or whatever, and vice versa. But I think that's part of the challenge, and part of the reward is to figure out ways in which you can kind of get out of your comfort zone and kind of develop those are things like skill sets of being talkative or being outgoing or being verbal, and perhaps when those perhaps are not your forte, and so, but you still, at the end of the day, you still want to be yourself, but you can figure out ways to be a better version of yourself. And so anyway, I think for me, it's been a lot of learning about myself as much as learning about the profession and learning about the specific cases that I work on. So I can go on, but I'll stop there.
Very helpful. So far we've heard from someone on the East Coast, the West Coast, the Midwest, and now we're going to jump to Tokyo. Rich.
Hi, everyone. I'm Richard Kim. I'm class of 96, along with WAAAAN and Danny. I think my story should be potentially comforting to anyone who, depending on how you define success, you're not really sure about what you want to do with your life. as people who know me from back then could tell you, I was probably the laziest and most directionless person at Williams College, like of my class. Most of my time was spent like trying to play like Animal House, like shenanigans, and see like, you know, how drunk I could be and still go to class. Like I was probably I was like one of the worst students at Williams. Because I think, but then like some of my classmates were like, okay, well, we're gonna take the LSATs because we're actually like, we actually have a plan with our lives. We're gonna go to law school and, become big time lawyers. And I was like, yeah, I've always done well at standardized tests, so maybe I'll take it. And I took it and I did really well. And but I put it in my back pocket. I had some vague thoughts about sort of, being a writer or being a stand-up comedian or something. And so I went back to LA and moved with my parents, very cool. And then I got a job at a PR firm. And I think people have said sort of both, should you work before you go to law school? Should you go straight to law school? I think if you need more discipline like I did, I think it's really good to work because, being in a 9 to 5, 9 to 6 environment where you're working and you're making $25,000 a year, and a lot of your coworkers are kind of dicks, and when you go through that process, you're like, man, like making like 6 times as much money and working like only twice as much. That doesn't sound so bad. Like, you're like, actually, maybe being a lawyer would be okay, And so, and one of the guys I met at the PR firm actually was Joseph Hahn, who is now in Lincoln Park, and he did a little better than I did. So we kind of hung out, and we were trying to work on like projects together, like graphic novels where he would illustrate and I would write. And we worked together for a summer, like 3 months, and then he's a very straight talker. And Joe said, hey, your ideas suck. Your writing is pretty boring, but you seem kind of smart. My sister goes to law school. You should probably go to law school. And that's not the only reason why I went, but sort of, anyway, all these things pulled me to the direction of going to law school. And I went to UCLA because my plan was to get a job in LA and never leave LA again. That worked out. So, and I actually really liked law school. Again, for someone like, for me, the discipline of having to go to class and then spend 3 hours studying every day and having to put in the work, and having just having targets I had to hit, like that's just made my day-to-day really like uncomplicated. And I was doing, and I did well in law school. And although I think all the stuff about sort of, well, Asians don't interview as well as Caucasians, and you don't necessarily get the plum slots with the big law firms, or when you do, you don't get the callbacks because you weren't charismatic enough. Like, I think certainly back in my day, all that stuff was true. Like, all my Asian guy friends and I who were in law school, we'd all be like, none of us got callbacks. Like, but the 3 white girls all got callbacks. Gee, wonder what that's all about. Like, so there was that, but at the time, it was kind of, you sucked it up and you went with the process because that was life in America, But I got off. I went to litigation. I became a litigation associate at what was then Heller Ehrman in Los Angeles. And then I was there for about 2.5 years. And so basically, when you're a big law associate, there's like a couple of years of sort of terror where you're working really hard and you're just like, can I do this? And then there's there's an associate midlife crisis where you realize, hey, actually I can do this, but I hate it. and then that's when you kind of decide, do I do something else? Do I go to a different law firm? And so I tried going to a different law firm that was doing more like Pacific Rim-based litigation work, because the one thing I had really enjoyed at Heller Ehrman was a trademark litigation matter that involved a Japanese plaintiff company and a Korean defendant company. And so I flew to Korea to do depositions and things like that, working with clients and sort of, being a bridge, like a cultural legal bridge, having language skills to talk to them in Korean. It was a lot more interesting and fun and rewarding than, doing insurance litigation, just domestically. And so, but I went to this other law firm, which was like in Gump, and I realized, no, actually, I just don't like this work. So, so I moved to Japan because I had this crazy theory that, there are a lot of Korean Americans who speak Korean, but there are like no Japanese people who come to the US to get law degrees. So if I could learn Japanese to be business proficient and sort of work the trilingual angle, then I should be able to get a job in Asia. So I went to, I took intensive language for a year and a half. I didn't speak Japanese before I came here. I then attended Kyoto University Law School, got a master's in comparative law. And then I kind of came to a crossroads where I was like, my supervising professor said, hey, you could get a PhD here and teach, and, it'd be like we think you'd have a niche here. And then my wife got pregnant, and one of my other professor friends was like, hey, I can get you an interview at Latham in Tokyo if you want. And I said, sure. And I went up there by Shinkansen, and that was my one interview. And I've been there for 15 years now. So that's my life. It's both, it's interesting or boring depending on how you look at it. I'd like to talk about my practice because it's really unusual. I think for I think people in America, for US, especially if you're still like considering law school, you think of being a lawyer as you're either a litigator or you do corporate work, and I'm a finance lawyer. Well, more specifically, I'm a project finance lawyer, which means I work in the financing and development of large-scale projects, generally like oil and gas, although less so recently, or power. Renewables are really big, and then certainly carbon capture and hydrogen are sort of like the new like go-to technologies. These projects cost an enormous amount of money, billions of dollars. Generally, the host country, or the companies that want to raise the capital don't have the balance sheet to raise that kind of money. What they do is they tap. So they'll go to, for example, on one of my deals, the sponsors, the companies that start the project and coordinate are called sponsors, and essentially they'll say, look, we're going to develop an LNG liquefaction project in Australia, and they'll go to the Korean government banks and the Japanese government banks and say, if you guys loan us money, we will sell the LNG to Korea and Japan, and so you get so you get resource security, we get capital, and a lot of the deals work this way. Some of the deals are more like in developing countries, like say Indonesia, where they're resource rich but obviously cash poor. They will go to Korea or Japan and say, if you loan us money, we will we will contract with a Japanese company to build the power plant, and then you get paid from the electricity sales over 20 years. Some of these deals are you feel like I'm doing really great things for the world, and this is I'm building a bright future for your daughter, my daughter, and your kids. Some of the deals you're kind of like, well, this is politically questionable. But it's a really interesting line of work that I think most people probably have not thought about when becoming a lawyer, and so I thought, that's why I thought it was important to join the call, just to let you all know that there are massive sacrifices to moving overseas. I've been living in Japan 18 years now. Obviously, I miss my friends and family. When you're working as a lawyer, at least at a more junior level, you're not like, you'll see your family and friends 10 days a year. It's not ideal. As you get older, you have more flexibility, and especially now with COVID, I think probably next year, maybe for like a month, I'll get out. So, so there is that. There are certainly trade-offs in terms of life, work balance and quality. But I really like living in Tokyo. This is a great city. Some of the, I'm an Asian face, so I never feel like, that I'm a minority. I speak Japanese. So if you're Korean American and you speak Korean and you're in Seoul, you might feel more at home than you do in your actual hometown. Like it just is how it works. But I do feel a bit of not guilt per se, but certainly, my sister who's a Asian studies professor is like, you parachuted out. You basically took like the easy route, and you left the country and took a job in a place where you can get away with sort of not dealing with a lot of the social issues that are going on in the U.S. right now. I said that's not the primary reason why I came out here, but yes, that's also true. I do donate heavily to the Democratic Party, if that means anything. So I guess my last point that I would make is, as I said, go into law school with the knowledge that like lawyer is just a word. It's like teacher or writer. Like there are a lot. It doesn't in itself. It doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't mean like what you're capable of or what you do. It's just where you start from. And also, one thing I would really, once you become lawyers, I know big law's hard. Lots of people, hate it, and I don't necessarily love it. But and this is something that always makes me a little sad when my associates quit, like 2 or 3 or 4 years into the profession. Like it gets easier, it gets more fun, because the reason why this is a profession and not just a job is because you get better at it, you get good at it. And you feel good about being good at it, and your clients respect you, and they turn to you when they need advice, and so to never taste that aspect of being a big firm lawyer, and to have given up just having done the 2,800 hours a year, and then sort of having been spat out. Like I always think, if they went on to do, and most of them go on to do great things. They work for Disney, and they work for Netflix, and they work for Google, and and so I'm sure, and they make a lot more money than I do. Like, and there's a lot of, I'm sure they're all better off for it, but there is a lot of times when I'm like, man, that person really could have done so well if they had just kind of stuck on a little bit longer and enjoyed the work more. Okay, well, I guess that's about all for me.
Yeah, I love all the different perspectives we're getting. Thank you very much. Next up is Dan Chang.
All right, thanks, Joey. I'll try to keep it brief. I know we're running out of time. I just want to say it's great to see so many Asian faces. I mean, well, I'll say when I went to law school, I had a lot of doubts about whether it would be the right choice for me. I didn't know what law was. I thought it was like courtroom argument, and that's not something I wanted to do. But what I'll say is, in my experience, law is a very wide open profession, as Rich mentioned, and there's just a lot of opportunities. Like, for example, what I did for a while in the government, I did rulemaking. So you write rules, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of writing, it's very analytical, and it was non-confrontational, which I really liked. There's not a specific type of person, I think, who needs to go to law school. So I think if you're worried that law school may not be something that matches your personality, I wouldn't worry about that. Law school is more like a door, and you can open and just go through and do all sorts of different things. So one thing I'll tell you, when I was looking at law school, I talked to a fellow who is JD PhD, and I asked him, you don't seem to be using your law degree, why not? And he said, well, he's like, I like doing research, I like doing economic analysis, but for me, the law degree is sort of useless. But for other people, I would say you take the law degree if they pick one, because economics degree is very specialized, and you basically, have only one thing you can do. Whereas a law degree, you can work in policy, you can work at a law firm, you can work in-house for a company. And a lot of people get the law degree to sort of credential themselves and do something else. And I think it is very respected. So I'll say that. My personal background, I went to Georgetown for law school. I worked at a large law firm in New York at Sherman Sterling, and I work at the government at the Securities and Exchange Commission. And what I will say is, one thing that I noticed early on in my career is that people who are at the higher level in government, they're almost all lawyers. I think the lawyers make the policy, the lawyers sort of determine what happens behind the shadows. A lot of presidents are lawyers. If you're interested in policy, I think economics is helpful. I think public policy, of course, is helpful, but I think the lawyers write the rules. And I think if you're interested in policy work and sort of making the world a different place, a law degree is surprisingly helpful. And the last thing I'll say is, I think law has a very low floor. I think it's possible that you can get into law and not really know what you're doing and be very unhappy. But I think law has a very high ceiling. And I think the important thing is to really talk to people, get ideas. You can have a very different experience at the same law firm being in a different practice group. And you may not even know that a practice group exists that sort of satisfy you if you don't talk to people. And you may not know that certain policy jobs exist if you don't talk to people. So definitely, get out there, talk to people, don't be afraid. There's no like right or wrong person. You may think that you're not, appropriate for like a certain job, but you don't know until you apply. And surprisingly, I think you may be the right person for the job after all.
I think there's so much good advice today. Thank you very much, Dan. And next up, we have Liz Kim. Jean mentioned earlier the job of AUSA. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but Liz will explain it to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Liz. I'm a 2009 grad from Williams. It was just so incredible to hear from all the alums today. I wish I had heard all of this when I was a senior at Williams applying to law schools. And when I was a 1L, I think I certainly would have benefited so much from all of the wisdom that was shared this evening. Given that a lot of folks have already, discussed a lot of other important issues, I'd like to just discuss careers in government, because I've always worked in government. So I'm currently an AUSA at the Civil Division at SDNY, and it's an amazing job. I represent the government in both affirmative and defensive cases. So my affirmative practice involves large-scale investigations in teams. Some of my active investigations are environmental, civil fraud, civil rights. The defensive practice is also very busy, although less glamorous. So some of my cases involve tort cases. So I recently settled a tort case involving a postal truck that was involved in an accident in New York City. During the Trump administration, I had to defend some challenging agency decisions, which was very interesting. And I've also just defended, several agency decisions. So I've worked closely with federal agencies. So it was very fascinating to hear what it's like also from the agency counsel side. I loved hearing from Vivia about how the practice of law has changed over the years. So I recently had a baby, and I think that COVID has brought a number of great changes that have positively affected women. So when I came back from maternity leave, my office gave me a lot of flexibility that allowed me to continue to nurse my baby and allowed me to have flexibility. So I conducted remote depositions, conducted a remote Second Circuit argument, which was amazing. I think now is an interesting and also exciting time for law, where there are a lot of opportunities, especially in government. I know my office in particular is actively recruiting and seeking diverse candidates. Especially in government, when you are assigned a case, it is your case. Whether you're prepared or not, you represent the United States when you appear in court. Your briefs are certainly going to be vetted by your supervisors, but it is your brief, so you have to take ownership. And so I think that's one of the most amazing aspects and empowering aspects about being an AUSA. And especially rewarding as an Asian American. I feel incredibly grateful to be serving in this role. And I highly encourage anyone who is interested in public service and government to apply to be an AUSA if that is something that you're interested in.
And actually, speaking of which, we're going to turn to Carol next. But for those people who are on the line, if there's anyone who's currently a law student. When I was a law student, I worked in Liz's office as a summer intern. So there's the summer opportunity too. So next we'll turn to Carol Wu to talk about the law school application process.
Yeah, thanks. It's really great to hear from everyone about their own experiences and, the diverse career path that people have been having. As a 2L, I don't have the most current because I'm not a 1L anymore, but I just want to, I feel like people from Williams would be able to find the materials that, everyone needs to apply to law school. So I just want to give an example of the timeline that I had. So I was working full-time when I was applying to law school. I actually ended up working for 3 years just because I wasn't sure if I wanted to go into law when I graduated. And then as I was working in education consulting, the summer and fall seasons are kind of the busiest seasons for me. So I started writing my application statements relatively early in June. I worked on them until, say, August, September-ish, applied in October, heard back from my first law school right around Christmas, which, made it really nice because then you know that you're actually going to law school for the holiday seasons. Heard back from Penn in January, and that was when I knew that I was coming to Penn. There are a couple of, I'm gonna be like super quick, but just 2 things. First of all, I just went through the OCI, the on-campus interview process this summer, and I just want to say that the Williams network is super helpful. I reached out to people, both who like went to Williams and also people who went to Penn Law, and I noticed that there's a pretty noticeable difference in the response rates for, because the Williams, basically, I think everyone that I reached out from Williams at least emailed me back. But that's not necessarily the case for people, who went to Penn Law, and I think that's understandable because if I were, a practicing attorney, I would be much more excited to see someone who's from Williams too reaching out to me. So definitely tap into that network when you are doing pre-OCI or OCI. And also something else is that I noticed that for the callbacks, at least, a lot of the firms are trying to put at least one, Asian or at least colored minority interviewer during the 4 or 5 people that you'll be meeting during the callbacks, which I think reflects, an effort to at least recognize, minorities in the legal field. So I feel like that has been a pretty nice thing to see compared to what we've been hearing from the panelists, and I just want to recognize them for that effort, even though, we all know that they could be doing much better as the legal industry in general. So.
Great, thank you very much. Well, we don't have any questions in the chat, but I will ask one of everyone who spoke or anyone who's on the line if they have any experiences to share about being an Asian American lawyer. A number of you touched on it a little bit, but any stories people want to share, experiences or advice or thoughts on Asian Americans in law? If not, the question is going to be, anyone have a guess when we're going to have our first Asian American Supreme Court justice?
So actually, I have a comment, and I also see a question in the chat. But so there's Anne-Marie Slaughter. She's a lawyer and a columnist, and she wrote a book called something like, Don't Find a Mentor, Find a Sponsor. And basically what she was saying is don't try to find someone who looks like you and just emulate them. Try to find someone who does what you want to do and emulate them. And they're saying, I think I forgot what we said earlier, but if there's a particular field you want to be in, try to find someone influential in that field, as opposed to just find someone who's like Asian. Because if they're Asian, but they're not in the field that you want, it's not really helpful.
Well, actually, we do have 2 questions. I'm going to throw them both out there, and then anyone can answer either of them. One is from Sean Tan, class 2022. Do you think the law is a valuable tool in creating stronger communities? And then earlier we had a question to Carol and Richard. What is your thought process for practicing law abroad, for example, in Asia, and what would that require? What is the difference pursuing a JD in the US and a law education elsewhere?
So at least, well, obviously, assuming there are no public sector jobs for US qualified attorneys in Asia, at least not that I'm aware of. We hire, and I think most law firms in Asia hire people out of New York and Los Angeles and Chicago, corporate attorneys primarily, but also some litigators, because there's an increasing global dispute resolution practice. So I think one thing that I don't advise, and it's hard to do anyway, is try to go to Asia straight out of law school, because we don't have the infrastructure here to give you the training you need as a junior. And frankly, you'll be much more useful to us if you spend a year, even 1 year, at a big New York law firm, just understanding how the firm works and the basics of being able to look up documents and things like that. I mean, so I think for UK lawyers, it's a little bit easier, just because although other than essentially Tokyo and increasingly less so Seoul, Asia is English law based in terms of the transactions, because Hong Kong, Shanghai, Singapore, Australia, and so forth all have easy access to UK lawyers. So they can finish their training and come out here. But if you're a US lawyer, I think it's good to do something just generic, like transactional law. M&A is very desirable. People will interview you carefully, because frankly, it costs the firm like $200,000 just to bring you out here. We don't really want you to decide after a year, okay, that was fun. It's something I check off the bucket list. So we do try to be very careful about not hiring unserious people. But I think the one thing that is really great about working in Asia, and this is what I tell people who interview with me, is you're not, even if you work for a big law firm, you're not a cog. Like even Latham's Tokyo office, even though we have 2,500 lawyers worldwide, Tokyo office is only 25 lawyers. We need you. People are there to help work with you. Go out to lunch, and it's not, and you have more job security. To be honest, it's not like New York where it's like, oh, you went to 2,350 and you're now in the bottom third of associates. Like next year you're out. Like here, if you're a good worker, we give people more rope than that. So I think that's another thing, is you can, it's a chance to grow sort of on your own terms and still make the New York salary.
Great. So does anyone have questions for each other?
Actually, Shuwei, I was gonna, if I could, I was gonna respond to that first question.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
About the kind of whether law is a valuable tool in creating stronger communities. I mean, I will say that on the one hand, while I feel like there were times where I probably could have done even more, I certainly, while I was at the firm or other types of opportunities, both in the law or outside the law, I do think the law is a really valuable way to contribute. I mean, everybody has their own personal needs, ranging from whether they've got lots of loans or whether they have certain family, kind of family and personal obligations to deal with or whatever. But kind of regardless of what job you're doing, you don't have to be working for the ACLU, or you don't have to be working for like legal aid to be able to provide services to others who need services. And so much of what we hear today is, and not just in the law, but just in general in the media, is not just empowerment, but empowerment in access, and having people kind of looking out for you, helping out. One of the things about a firm, and I talked about, and others have talked about their firm experiences and whether they work out well or whatever, but firms are a great place to be able to provide, even when you're doing training in, in big areas of law like antitrust or tax or whatever. You get to do a lot of pro bono opportunities, and then that can spur on other ideas or other opportunities for you. I will always say till the day I retire that one of my most rewarding experiences at my firm was I got to do a criminal appeal, pro bono. It was a drug case, and I just happened to have. It turned out to be like a perfect law school, issue spotting type of thing, where I had a Fourth Amendment search that went bad or something like that, and so I got to go through that stuff, and I got to help out this client. And it was so much more rewarding than trying to figure out, well, how can I help this, multi-million-dollar corporation, save some money or something like that. So, and that's just one example, but there's so many ways to do that. And then that can spur on, well, hey, I'll go volunteer at the local voter precinct, make sure that, everyone's able to vote. Or, I'll, my Korean's not great, but, I could try to go and try to be a translator for someone who needs a little bit of, help with, figuring out their lease or something like that. There's so many different ways. And the law I think is a great way to be able to leverage a lot of opportunities and ways to help out others. And I think that speaks to the ability to make a stronger community. So, I wasn't sure if that question was brought because of whether it's cynicism or kind of concern or uncertainty, but to the extent that there's uncertainty in that question, I think you can just make of it what you will, the legal profession. But
I want to second what Danny just said. I head up pro bono for our little firm, and our resources are much less than what we had at the big firm. So whether you land at a big firm or a little firm, or just go directly into government practice, there will be so many opportunities throughout your career to do pro bono work and to help the communities that you're interested in helping through your legal training. We did a bunch of asylum work under as a response to the last administration. A bunch of my colleagues and I realized during the last administration that there was a real crackdown on immigration, and there was a buildup of asylum cases, and we were able to focus on, a detention facility in Elizabeth, New York, and really have kind of weekly trips down there for some of our associates who wanted to work up asylum applications and cases. And so, those avenues are going to be available to you, and you are going to be specially trained and equipped to help underserved communities. So absolutely, I think the answer is yes. It's, law can be used to build up communities, and there is a real need for legal services in immigration and other areas, obviously in New York right now. So yeah, as a last word, as someone who's practiced law for 2 decades now, I really want to see more Asians in the bar across all disciplines. I want to see them as jurists. I haven't seen an Asian American jurist yet, and I'm still hoping that I end up in one of their courtrooms. I just think that this is a significant sphere of influence in our society, and the more we're represented here, really, the better. It's all the stereotypes being what they are. I think it's not sometimes a very attractive field for our community, but someone who's practiced for a while here, there is definitely a place for us. And there's also kind of a vacuum that we would really hope to fill with new generations of attorneys.
Thank you, Jean. I think that's a great note to end on. So let me thank all the alums for taking the time to share your stories and your experiences with others. Really appreciate it, and I learned a lot, and it's great to see everyone. So thank you again, and keep your eye out for more WAAAAN events. One last thing I want, actually, maybe Zarelli, if you can put in the the chat, there is a CLE coming up. It's posted by Fordham. I can't remember where I wrote it. It's about the lost history of Asian Americans and U.S. civil rights litigation lessons for today. The speaker is going to be Judge Denny Chin. There's going to be a link in the chat to sign up for that. Maybe we'll see you guys there. It's a really interesting topic, and we'll have, of course, more WAAAAN events as well. So thank you again.